Feeding the spirit. We can think of the human experience as a threefold um, dynamic where you have the mind, the body, and the spirit. And in the mind, you can say that in your mind's eye is where your soul exists, but this is also where the ego is created. And the function of the ego primarily is to accommodate the needs of the body, whereas the soul is more so being pulled towards the need of the spirit. And with these three dynamics happening, it is very important or integral, especially if you are somebody who feels spiritually inclined, or if the growth of the spirit is important to you. It's very important to strengthen the connection between the soul and the spirit, to prioritize that over the connection between the ego and the body. This is because if the connection between the soul and the spirit is strengthened, then the needs of the body will automatically be met in a way that surpasses what the ego can contrive or come up with as far as getting your needs met. We can think about the connection with the spirit, feeding the spirit as strengthening the signal in a way. So for example, when you have like your 5Gs versus, I guess, having lower bars on your cell phone, when the signal is stronger, your device will operate more efficiently. It'll operate at its optimal level. And so, similarly, if you are strengthening that connection between your soul and your spirit, everything else below it is going to operate at an optimal level, and it's going to operate in a way that our versions of ourselves, our egos, who we believe ourselves to be, cannot facilitate. We just don't have the capacity to do so. In part because who we believe ourselves to be, oftentimes our names, our personalities, who we believe ourselves to be in the mind, in the ego, oftentimes, actually always, is going to be an illusion. And the more you strengthen that connection with the spirit, that illusion will start to fall away, and you will start to discover the true essence that is within. You will start to discover that sense of oneness and the love and the spirit that is within, that is constant. It's never changing, and it always has a quality of peace, of fulfillment, of satisfaction, and of service. And so I just wanted to supply a few tips that can help to strengthen that connection with the spirit. And by doing so, it will have a domino effect on all the other aspects of your life when it pertains to your purpose, how you should be spending your time, what relationships should you be entering into, how to experience a sense of peace regardless of what's going on the external plane. And so yes, strengthening the spirit, strengthening the connection between your soul, your mind's eye, and the spirit is going to have this domino effect in all the other areas of your life. And so the first tip that I would like to provide is just to get into the habit of prayer and meditation. So whatever the mind is focused on, that is how you are going to perceive your external world around you. So you could have the same scenario happening in front of two different people, but if their perceptions are totally different, they're going to view that scenario in totally different ways. Say, for example, you have two children, and for whatever reason, one child is more predisposed to be in alignment with that connection between the soul and the spirit, and the other child is more predisposed to be driven by the ego, by the lower self. And there's a parent for the two children, and the parent maybe is not giving them the right amount of attention in that moment. And so you have the same scenario in front of you, but you have child A who has that spiritual connection more so. They're going to view that situation with a lot more grace and compassion for the parents, and their sense of peace and security is going to be consistent in that moment that they are not getting the attention from the parent. They're going to have the capacity to be able to consider a different perspective for the parent, that maybe they're busy, maybe the parent does care about me and wants to give me attention, but maybe they're busy with work. and they're stressed out with work, but ultimately they're at work in order to provide for us. Whereas child B, who is more ego driven, they might see this lack of attention from the parent, and they will take it as a reflection of themselves and their own self-worth. They'll view it as, I'm not worthy enough for my parents' attention, and depending on their personality disposition, they could either lash out on the parent, they can become withdrawn and isolate, and ultimately this can create wounds within the child that will then have to be healed and examined later on in life. And so I hope that example is helpful. I just want to paint out that your perspective of the external world is totally dependent on the climate and temperature of your internal being. And so some tips that are very helpful for strengthening that connection between the soul and the spirit. First and foremost, I really would encourage you to get into some type of habit and routine of prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation have always been kind of interchangeable for me. I view them as the same. To an extent, I do think that prayer can have a subtle nuance that is different from meditation, but essentially you're wanting to align yourself with the will of God. You're wanting to align yourself with the higher self. You're wanting to align yourself with a purpose and a calling that is higher than the needs and the desires of the ego or of the body. The language isn't that important. Like I said, some people will say aligning yourself with God, with the higher self, with the Holy Spirit, with the Atman. But essentially, you are aligning yourself with a will and a perspective and a point of view that is higher than what the ego can come up with. And so when this is done, especially if you do it in the morning time, it is going to shift your perception throughout the day. It's going to shift the tone. It's going to shift your reactions to the situations around you. It's going to shift your decision making. And so a simple way to do this, especially in the morning times, as soon as you wake up, especially if you have the habit of just grabbing your phone as soon as you wake up to get on social media and scroll, try to take a moment to get centered and grounded in yourself in the morning time. So this can be a simple prayer. It can be a prayer that, you say the same words every day. Or it could be just a quick 5-minute meditation. And in this meditation, don't be so worried about, trying to get into this very yogic guru type of state, but really just focus on trying to be still in the body and set intentions for the day. And one of the highest intentions that you can set is, God, please allow your will to be done today through me. Please allow me to be of service to others in a way that you see fit. It could be as simple as that, or you could just say a prayer for how grateful you are for the things in your life in this current moment. And by doing this simple act, it can really help to strengthen the connection between the soul and the spirit, and also it will have this domino effect, like I said before, on all the other aspects of your life. Another way you can strengthen the connection between the soul and the spirit is to be of service to others. Truly, our purpose here on earth is to serve others through our gifts, through our lives. And by doing so, all of our needs are going to be met. We will truly find fulfillment through serving others. And the way service looks for me will look totally different from how service might look for you. And so that's why it's very important to get grounded in yourself and to strengthen that communication between your soul and your spirit, because you will get guidance and you will have clarity on how service looks for you. And oftentimes, service is going to be done through your natural gifts that you're given in this life. I feel like everyone is born with a certain set of gifts, they're attuned a certain way when they're born to be interested in the arts or be interested in intellect and mathematics and computers. Some might be talented in dance. Some might be talented in listening and being a healer for other people. But regardless, once you do strengthen that connection between yourself and spirit, those gifts will become very clear to you. And how to share those gifts with others is going to be very clear to you. And so finding small ways to serve other people on a day-to-day basis can be a great action that you can take in order to strengthen that connection. And while I feel like service for a lot of people has become very minimized to, let me do community service, or let me help serve this person in a material way. Service can be very simple. Like it can be as simple as reaching out to somebody and checking on them. It could be as simple as going to spend time with somebody. It could be as simple as making somebody laugh because you're a funny person. And so really try to expand your idea of service, but at the same time, if you do view service in that way of serving others materially or serving others by volunteering and doing community service, just start there. And as long as you have that intention for serving, the ways to serve and how service looks for you in the highest way is going to become very clear to you as you start to set those intentions. And once again, that could be a prayer that you pray. So, God, please show me how I can serve others. Please show me how I can use my gifts to serve others. I think a lot of our instincts or a lot of the conditioning from the ego and just how we're raised is to use our gifts to serve ourselves. Oftentimes we'll think, well, how can this make me money? How can this get me status? How can this put me ahead of other people? I think that's just how the world is oriented right now. And so that is what we are going to be inclined to do. But if you are using your gifts, if you are using your intention for yourself, while you can make efforts and strides that will satisfy you for moments at a time, ultimately you will find yourself feeling a sense of emptiness and like you're just not quite meeting the mark all the way. And so by shifting that intention from serving myself to serving others, it will have this it will have a significant impact on the internal state of your life, of your capacity to experience peace amid any kind of chaos that's going on the external plane. It will really strengthen your capacity to experience peace and fulfillment on a day-to-day basis. And it's one that most people have not even been able to experience just because of how we're conditioned, and even just from the lack of or the absence of us feeding that connection between our soul and our spirit. Another very powerful way to strengthen this connection, and once again, when I say strengthen the connection between your soul and your spirit, ultimately I'm just saying feeding your spirit. I think that's kind of like a colloquial term that captures what I'm trying to explain here, is just feeding your spirit on a day-to-day basis versus feeding the ego/body. Think of yourself in this middle space of the mind, your mind's eye. Think of your body on this side, and then think of your soul on this side. Oftentimes, this will show up in pop culture as kind of like the angel and the demon on your shoulder, and they both have different needs or different actions that they're wanting you to take. And the will, the personality, the soul, the ego lies here in the middle. And it's up to you to decide whether you're going to be led by your ego or led by the soul and by the needs of the spirit. So I think that's a great way to capture it. But another very powerful way to strengthen that connection is to make choices on a day-to-day basis that align with your convictions. Whenever we have a conviction and we go against it, that is ultimately what sin is. And once again, I'm speaking from a more Christian background just because that's how I was raised, but what I'm speaking to is not exclusive to any religious philosophy. I'm really trying to capture a truth that is applicable and universal for everybody. But ultimately, whenever you make a choice especially if you make a choice where you knew better, where you tried it out before, you realized it didn't work, it didn't bring you the satisfaction and fulfillment before, but you still choose to make that choice again instead of aligning with the higher conviction, that ultimately is what sin is for. And that's ultimately where atonement comes in, but we can talk about that in a different scenario. But I think the priority is that I'm trying to show that once you make choices that align with your convictions, this is going to strengthen that bond, that connection between the soul and the spirit. I think having a visualization for it can be very helpful. So for me, I just think of, you can either have, those two different forces or pulls on your shoulders, and you can think of there being a line from your heart. And so it's like a thread from your heart to this side, and then you have a thread from your heart to this side. And if you visualize the thread that's going towards the spirit as getting thicker, it can even have like this glow to it. It can have like a light, bright color to it. If you visualize that thread getting stronger as a representation of you feeding the spirit or growing your connection with the spirit, oftentimes this visualization can help as well. But back to what I was saying about aligning with your convictions. On a day-to-day basis, really, really try to align with your convictions, whether it's small choices or very large choices. knowing what your convictions are is a very personal and subjective. It's subjective in the sense that what your conviction is might not be the same for me, but knowing what your convictions are oftentimes just that nudge you get, that intuitive inkling that you might get where you feel like you should be doing something else, but you are so used to acting or being fed or being led by your ego or the lower self that you oftentimes will go against what you feel in your heart is right to do. And so whatever you feel is right, it's that sense of your virtues, whatever you feel is righteous, what your values are. If you were acting and making choices based on that on a day-to-day basis, this can really transform and strengthen that connection between your soul and your spirit. Analogy that I like to use a lot of times is think of a car and you have somebody driving and you have a passenger. And so you can either have your lower self, your ego, your ego driving the car. Think of this as like a lowercase s, and then you may have the higher self in the passenger seat or in the back seat. These are generally people who are living their lives driven by the ego. And this car is not going to end up at the right destination. This car is probably going to take every path that has chaotic weather on the way. It's going to put you in a path that is not going to get you to your destination in a safe and unscathed way. There's going to be consequences that could have been avoided had you allowed the higher self to be in the driver's seat and the lower self to be in the passenger seat or the back seat. And something that's very important to note is that the ego is, though to a degree it's an illusion, we are in a realm of separation. And so the ego is very real in this dimension that we're in, this space of separation in this material realm. And so the goal is not to destroy it, it's not to get rid of it. It's you acknowledge it, do not ignore your ego, because its primary function is for the survival of the body ultimately, the survival of the self. But if you are allowing your higher self to drive and be the captain and the director of the show, of your body, of your life, your ego will naturally become in line with that. Your ego will naturally become attuned and aligned with the mission of the higher self, with God's will. And it will properly play its part in your life. But if you're allowing it to drive the ship, you just will not get to your destination in a way that is correct. And so really keep that in mind when you are thinking about just your current state in life, whether you feel a sense of confusion or a sense of not feeling fulfilled or a sense of never having enough. Because oftentimes the ego is going to put you on this path where it's constantly striving to get fulfillment through these material measures. It could be through money, it could be through sex, it can be through relationships, it can be through food. But it only knows how to find fulfillment through material things, and that fulfillment is not coming from an internal space. And you can only truly be fulfilled from the inside out. And so the higher self or the spirit is what will show you that path. But in order for you to be able to see it through your mind's eye, you really have to prioritize that connection and really prioritize feeding your spirit. So yes, to summarize, prayer, really get into a space of prayer. Really try to make choices that are aligned with your convictions on a day-to-day basis, whether they're small or large. Spend time in nature, because this can be another way to feed that connection between the soul and the spirit. Spend time around children even, and really pay attention to their behaviors and try to mimic their behaviors to an extent. If you notice, children have this innocence and they have not yet gotten into the conditioning and the patterns of the ego. And so, for example, they will oftentimes get upset, but they quickly will forget about it, and they'll go right back into their natural inclined gifts, their natural habits, their natural inclinations that are aligned with their highest self. But of course, as life goes on, as we get exposed to other people who are wounded from our parents, from conditioning, from our friends and family and whoever else, we will start to align with our egos more so, instead of staying in that space of alignment with the spirit that we kind of come into this world as. I think another thing that I would like to mention is that in the same way that you can feed your spirit, you can also feed the connection between your ego and your body, or your ego and your lower self. Okay, actually the ego is like the lower self, but I guess I'm trying to say in the same way that the spirit can be fed, the ego can be fed as well, and that is what gives it the power to be driving the vehicle versus the higher self driving the vehicle. So in the same breath of considering ways you can feed the spirit, consider ways that you are feeding your ego and figure out ways to stop doing that, essentially. So Um, these are, I think, feeding the ego oftentimes is seen as like sins. Like I said, I'm using this language from Christianity, but I really trust that you'll be able to hear past it. But for example, like the 7 deadly sins, where it's like gluttony, pride, anger, lust, and whatever the other ones are, these are mechanisms that the ego uses to feed itself. And so the more you give into these themes or these areas of life, which once again, they are only concerned with the body, with the material, you will not be able to find happiness or true fulfillment. It's just, and it's not so much like it's possible, but you're just not able to do it. It truly is because it's an illusion. Like, it's not real. There's nothing substantial behind it to find fulfillment through. There's nothing to ground in. It's an illusion. It's something that we are taught through a very rigorous and extreme process of conditioning. And so really try to figure out a way to transfer your energy and your attention and your mind from ways that you're feeding your ego into ways that you can feed your spirit. And as you feed your spirit, there's this autopilot mode that will kind of happen where you are aligning yourself with God's will, and your perception and your intuition will work in a way where you will know what actions and what things are correct for you in this life. And it can only lead you to a life of fulfillment and peace. And when I say a life of fulfillment and peace, I'm not saying that everything on the external plane is just going to work out and be, just the perfect scenario that you might think. But I'm saying that your reactions, your perception to the things around you, the peace that you have within will not be affected by you'll be able to have that sense of compassion and forgiveness for others around you, regardless of their wrongdoings. You'll be able to exist in that mind of God where love only exists and where forgiveness is always available. And just as God can forgive you, you'll have that capacity to forgive others as well. So that's really all I wanted to share. I really do hope that it was clear and that it really is able to touch your heart. And I will see you on the next video.